So standing in the valley of Elah in Israel is a unique experience, though it really isn't too spectacular. It's like standing in a desert valley kind of around Cache Creek. Uh, it's about the same that it was probably 3,000 years ago, except the creek is dried up now, so there's just a dry creek bed there. But standing there, it's super easy to imagine what it must have been like for David facing off Goliath. The valley sits there and there's ridges on either side, so you can easily picture Saul and his men on one side and Goliath and his men on the other side, these Philistines, and the idea of them, Goliath coming down and just yelling at the Israelites and challenging them. But Goliath would have been a sight to see. I mean, think about this. The average ceiling is like 8 feet tall. In my office here, at its peak, it's probably about 10 feet tall. And what historians have said was that Goliath was probably 9 feet tall, but then he had this headdress like the American Indian had, and he would stand maybe 13 feet tall altogether. Sheesh. He's a monster of a man, probably a descendant of the Nephilim, probably trained like in warfare from his childhood all the way through, a fighting man all his life in every way. He's intimidating, more powerful than 5 average guys put together. And then it says David ran to face him, ran to the battle. He ran toward Goliath. Amazing. Most of us would run away from the fight, which is what most of the Israelites did at the time. They were effectively doing, and they were shaking in their sandals. But David ran toward Goliath and ran toward the fight with what? With major faith and humility, confidence, properly placed. So prior to the fight, David, he says to King Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. When there came a lion or a bear or, that came and took a lamb from the flock, well, I went after him. So not just attacked by a lion, but he went after, and he attacked the lion, he attacked the bear, and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth, like took the lamb right from its mouth. And he arose against me, and I caught him by his beard. I mean, think of this, like catching the lion by his beard, and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both, lions, plural, and bears, plural, and this uncircumcised giant Philistine, he's going to be like one of them, for he defies the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. That's in 1 Samuel 17. David ran to the battle with faith. He loaded up his sling with faith. He let loose that sling with faith, by faith. And yet, it's a stone that hit Goliath in the forehead, but it was faith that took him down. It's faith that took down the giant that day. Goliath got the point, if you know what I mean. A stone flung by faith that it would hit the mark. Faith guided that stone right to Goliath. And as David beaked off at Goliath and trash talked him, and they trash talked each other, basically he told him, you will know, all the world will know, all the earth will know that there is a God in Israel. And that he says, all that the assembly may know that the Lord saves not by the sword. He had no sword in his hand. Not by the spear. He had no spear. For the battle is the Lord, and he will give you into my hands. Says Goliath. But when the Philistine rose up and drew close to meet David, and David was running quickly toward him, and it says David put his hand in his bag. He took out a stone from the sling, or put it in the sling, and he struck the Philistine on the forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. Didn't knock him backwards, it knocked him, and then he fell forward onto his face. And Goliath said, "Oh, I never saw that coming," which he didn't. And it says David prevailed over the Philistine by faith with a sling and with a stone, but it says that he struck and killed him. David didn't have a sword. He went and ran up to Goliath, stood over the Philistine, took Goliath's sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah were like, "Did you just see that?" And then they rose up, and with a big shout, they pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. And so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way, and the Israelites took care of them. The people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines out, and they plundered their enemy. David took the head of the Philistine, brought it to Jerusalem, and he put his armor. He took Goliath's armor and stuck it in his tent. They say that fear is contagious, and I think we've seen a good deal of that. And it manifests itself in many different ways. It's not just about the fear of COVID. It's about a fear of all kinds of things. And the Bible actually says it's contagious in Deuteronomy 20. It says, "Do not fear, for you will affect your brothers." But notice that courage is also contagious. Courage, the men of Israel rose up with a big shout and, let's get him. Courage seems to fan this flame of faith. And despite the great victory, well, we know that David soon goes off into the desert, and he's running from Saul, and he's just tracking in the desert caves because of Saul's jealousy. So sometimes it doesn't all add up. Sometimes 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4. Sometimes things happen and you can't understand it. I mean, David was given a word by Samuel, he's going to be the king, and then he spends a decade at least in the desert running. Sometimes things happen. Will he stay faithful in the desert? Will he stay faithful under attack? He does. But there's a lot of processing on his journey, and there's a lot of complaining. He says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and may his praise be continually in my mouth." But there's other Psalms that say that he voiced his complaints day by day. There was a lot of complaining going on. There was a lot of just pouring out his heart to God, and God's okay with that. But he does stay faithful. The question is, in our stuff, will we stay faithful? Will you stay faithful? Will I stay faithful? That is worth pausing and thinking about, which is what the word Selah means. Pause and think on this. Selah.